When it comes to buying a resale property, I think a lot of people jump in straight into things like how much they like it, renovation, or maybe the view. I mean, those things matters, of course. But before any of that, right, there are 3 fundamentals that you really have to get right first. If you get these 3 things right, your property will naturally hold its value better over time. And when the day comes that you want to sell, right, it becomes easier. There are less resistance, fewer objections, and more buyers. So before you commit to any resale properties, this is the checklist that I always go through with my clients. So the first thing we're going to look at is choosing a well-received project. I mean, a lot of people ask me, what makes a project well-received in the first place? Is it just location? Is it schools? I mean, those things are important, yes, but on their own, right, they are not enough to make a resale easy in the future. To really determine whether a project is popular and stays popular, these are the 4 things that I look at. I've actually shared this framework before in my Penrive video, and I will link it up in the top right-hand corner if you want to go into details later. But fundamentally, these are the 4 key factors. Number 1 is land size. I've mentioned a couple of times across my videos, and ideally, you really want to look into a project that is sizable, which is at least about 300 units above, and this is where we start seeing larger developments perform better over time. I mean, because in a large development, right, naturally you have more transactions and there are more owners who tends to benchmark off the last transacted price and aim to sell slightly higher. So when you have, say, like 500, 800 or even 1,000 units doing that over time, right, prices tend to get pushed up much faster as compared to a small development where transactions are fewer and far between. And on top of that, right, the land size would actually mean that there is better facilities. And for most own-stay buyers, that actually matters more than they realize. And secondly will be visibility. When someone is in the area, right, can they immediately recognize this project? Like from far, they're like, oh, I know this is that condo. And this matters because a popular development tends to stay popular for a very long time. Even 10 to 15 years later, buyers will still recognize the name and still want to live there. And thirdly, of course, the developer. A reputable developer would give buyers confidence in the build quality, maintenance, and also long-term upkeep. And confidence is definitely part of resale demand. And lastly, I want to point out on the layout, good layouts age much better. Even as years pass by, right, buyers can still walk in and say, okay, actually this makes sense, I can live with this. So when you're looking at resale condos, right, if a project ticks all of these 4 boxes, this already covers the first major criteria of finding a good resale property. And from there, right, we move on to the next step, which is the size of units. So what do I actually mean by size of units, right? So let's just say you have a budget of 1.8 million. And in today's resale market, you usually end up with 2 clear choices. You either buy a 2-bed, 2-bath in the city or city fringe area. And option 2, you actually can move out to maybe less central. But with the same budget, you can afford a proper 3-bedroom or even a 3-bedroom premium, especially in the heartlands or resale EC market. And my advice is usually very simple. Buy as big as you comfortably can within your budget. So let me share a real example, right? I recently have worked with a few clients who really value space, but they have been staying around in the Queenstown area for years. But with their budget, right, buying a 3-bedroom in the city or city fringe was not realistic. So instead of forcing a smaller unit just for the better location, they choose to move further out where they could actually get a 3-bedder which actually fits their lifestyle. And I think this reflects what is happening in the market today. New launches are definitely getting smaller and smaller. And for families, at some point, right, space becomes non-negotiable. And this is where buyers will start to say like, okay, I'm willing to travel a little bit more if it means that my family will get a little bit more comfortable, a more livable home. So when you own a larger unit, right, especially one with a practical layout, in a known and popular development, you will naturally appeal to a wider pool of buyers. And in many cases, right, the larger, more livable units are the first one to get sold when owners start exiting. And this is where the size matters. Not just for today, but how easy your property will be able to sell in the future. Now let's talk about step 3, which is the government land sales, or GLS in short. And this part is very important, which is I think something that a lot of buyers overlook. So let me bring you back to 2022, right? So when at this point, you could actually buy a resale EC at Prive at around $1,200 per square foot. And if you have bought a new launch at around the Lentor area, which is at $2,000 per square foot in 2022, how much would you realistically want to sell it 3 years later? I mean, people would usually say probably about $2,400 per square foot. It's possible, perhaps, but it's not really guaranteed, so nobody really knows. So if instead, right, you would have bought Prive at $1,200 per square foot, while the new launches in the Lentor area is already selling at $2,000 over per square foot, do you think that selling at $1,600 per square foot is achievable? I mean, between hoping for 2004, 2005 versus aiming for 1006, which one feels a little bit more realistic and protected? I mean, fast forward today, Prive has already appreciated to $1,600 per square foot. And the price gap between Prive and Lentor new launches, right, has narrowed from 69% in 2022 to roughly about 41% today. So when you look at these two situations side by side, right, I think you will ask yourself, who actually took on more risk and who actually had more downside protection? Was it the buyer who entered at a much higher new launch price, or the buyer who came in at a strong resale discount relative to the future supply? And this is why looking at nearby GLS and upcoming launch price matters so much when buying resale. Because you're not just buying at what the property is worth today. You're positioning yourself relative to what is coming next. And in the next example, I'll show you another case study again using Amo and Lentor area to help you decide how you want to balance risk when it comes to choosing a resale property. Back in 2022, you had Panorama, which is a resale condo in the area, and around the same time, you had Amo Residence, which is launching as a new launch nearby. And at that point of time, Panorama in 2023 was actually transacting near to $1,900 per square foot. And Amo Residence launch prices came in at around $2,280 per square foot. So the price gap between new and resale was about 20%. And that is roughly about $300 per square foot difference. So to put this in context, right, if you're talking about a 1,000 square foot home, that is about $300,000 more just to choose a new launch unit. And because of this gap, right, it is still a meaningful gap that buyers would prefer to purchase Panorama instead, because they could buy a 3-bedroom in the same area without stretching their budget by another $300,000. And that is also why you saw the transaction volume at Panorama pick up after Amo launch. Demand was supported because the price gap actually makes sense. So in this situation, right, if you were my buyer, I would generally say that resale option is still a fair and relatively protected product. But this is where it gets interesting, right? Fast forward to 2023, more and more Lentor launches came up in the market, and the prices were coming in at about $2,000 to $2,100 per square foot. And as Panorama continued to appreciate, right, the gap between Panorama and all the Lentor newer launches, right, started to narrow. From 20%, it narrowed all the way to about 7%. So when the gap gets tight, right, the risk profile actually changes. And at that point of time, Panorama is already about 10 years old. When resale prices get very close to new launch prices, right, buyer will naturally start to ask, why not I will just buy the newer one? So in this scenario, right, the safer option actually shifts back to the new launch rather than the resale. This is why I always tell my buyers that resale is not always safer and new launch is not always riskier. It really depends on where you're entering relative to the future supply and land prices. So I hope from these two case studies, you can see when resale is protected and when it starts to get riskier. So this is where all the 3 steps actually come together. When you're buying a resale property, you want to be buying into a popular development. You want a spacious, livable layout. And most importantly, you want it to be supported by the nearby or future government land sale that is at a higher price. If you actually get these 3 things right, even if you are buying as a second owner or third owner, your downside is actually much better protected over time. And that to me is how you choose a good resale property. But there's also one more layer that we need to talk about, and that is GFA harmonization. And to be honest, right, this is a newer risk that resale buyers have to deal with in today's market. And up to now, right, we've been talking about buying resale that is supported by future government land sales, so prices will be able to catch up. But here is also the catch. You don't want to be buying a resale that is sitting next to a government land sale site that can launch under the new harmonization rule. I know this is where people get confused. It sounds like I'm saying buy near government land sales, but I'm also saying don't buy near government land sales. But the reality is, right, resale buyers do have an extra layer of homework to do. And let me explain why. So under this GFA harmonization, right, new launch looks smaller on paper. I think that's what we all know. But because of the overall size, right, it becomes smaller. The total price or quantum often looks very attractive. And more importantly, right, the usable space that you actually live in is often not very different. And that is because harmonization mainly removes the non-livable areas like oversized balconies and aircon ledge, not the space that you can actually use every day. So let me use this case study to show you what I mean. So these two projects actually sit right next to each other. Riviere is actually a resale condo, and Zyon Grand is a new launch that just came up recently. So we are actually comparing the 3-bedroom units. For Zyon Grand, the 3-bedroom is 1,076 square feet harmonized, and Riviere's 3-bedroom is 1,216 square feet non-harmonized. And on paper, right, it looks very obvious. Riviere is much bigger, so people will tend to think that this is more valuable, right? But when we actually break it down, right, the difference is really not as dramatic as it looks. So for the living room and study, the difference is about 3 square meters, and that works out to be around 32 square feet. So kitchen and yard, same thing. Riviere has a slightly larger kitchen and yard of 3 square meters difference. For balcony, Zyon Grand has it slightly larger. For the master bed and master bath, it's the same. And for bedrooms 2 and 3, Riviere does have it a little bit larger, and the difference is about 1 to 3 square meters. The rest, common bathroom and home shelters, are almost identical. So yes, Riviere is definitely bigger in some areas. But here is the real question, right? Would you pay $667,000 more just to get a living room or kitchen that is 6 square meters bigger? I mean, let me take it one step further. 10 years later, right, when these two projects are hitting the resale market, and will future buyers really say, I must pay this $600,000 because the living room is slightly bigger? Honestly, very unlikely. And this is why GFA harmonization matters so much. Even though the new launch would look much smaller on paper, the quantum can be so much more attractive that it completely changes how buyers compare options. Because future buyers may choose something newer at a lower price while enjoying the same layout, same livability, and very similar usable space. So even if a resale, right, ticks all the 3 boxes in my checklist earlier, you still need to be careful because you don't want to be overpaying today only to be near a harmonized project launch at a much lower price in the future. So how do you protect yourself? I mean, by doing this homework and by checking whether your resale layout can still compete against the future harmonized layouts when they eventually come into the resale market. And this extra check, right, is what separates a safe resale purchase from a risky one. And that is the reality of resale buyers that they need to understand in today's market. I know that this can feel a little bit complicated and there are a lot of moving parts. Popularity, size, government land sale, and harmonization. And honestly, most buyers, they don't get into trouble because they made bad decisions. They get into trouble because they didn't know what to check in the first place. So if you're watching this and if you're not very sure on how to apply these steps to your own situation, it's completely normal. You can always reach out to me and I'll be happy to walk you through your options, look at your risks, and help you think it through properly before you commit. And if you want to stay updated on the new launches, resale case studies, and how I look at the market on the ground, you can also join my Telegram channel over here where I share things there that don't always make it on YouTube. And if you found this video helpful, do give me a like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.